While nothing ever really happened in this house, we always sensed weird presences. I was also ages 5 to 9 or something like that during that time. But I never had a wild imagination. I really don't know what brought up these memories. They just suddenly came back to me and I had the urge to confirm with my uncle, since I know now that he's just as sensitive, if not even more sensitive to the paranormal than me. Me, my mom, and my aunt and uncle, we all used to live in this really crappy, run-down apartment building. To give you an idea, the roof was damn near caving in from mold. It was infested with bugs, too. The landlord did nothing. Anyway, on to the paranormal. Both me and my uncle concur that we always felt this weight on our shoulders the entire time we were in the apartment. And it worsened when we went into the bathroom. And it would be completely gone if we went outside. The bathroom was the worst part of that place. You know that feeling when someone's watching you all the time? Well, in that room specifically, it was from the vent. It felt like red eyes, gave me serial killer vibes, but there was nothing in there. I remember being so scared to go in there, and for a long time after moving out, I was just scared of bathrooms. I know it sounds stupid, but it's true. Whatever was there truly terrified me. My uncle said he felt maybe 6 different entities in that house. I used to see exactly 6 shadowy figures at night, darker than the room around them. They wouldn't move, but they were humanoid, and I know what I saw. I'd never told that detail to anyone, though. I'd never even spoken about the things I felt in that house. I had buried the memories. And like I said at the beginning, I really don't know what made them resurface. There was one more thing that absolutely freaked me out. One time I was in my aunt and uncle's room crying. I don't remember why. I stopped for a minute. The room was completely silent. All of a sudden I hear a comforting hush. I was a child, and a voice coming out of nowhere like that completely terrified me. I bolted from the room and never liked staying in there very long after that. Later in life, me and my uncle casually started talking about ghosts. He mentioned before that his grandmother helped him tap into the paranormal, and now he's extremely sensitive to it. His side of the family are 100% believers. When these memories resurfaced, I had to confirm with him to find out if it was really my imagination, or if there really was something there. I'm positive. We were comparing notes with my uncle. Sort of confirmed it. He gave his experience first. It matched mine pretty much to a T. I almost want to go back there and see if all this still holds true. And partly to see if the building has collapsed yet. I may in the future, but I don't think I will anytime soon. An unexpected experience. After retiring from service in 2009, I was in Iraq working as a contractor. My job entailed traveling all over the country, making sure specific things got done. Sounds like a lot, but it really wasn't. In the end of August of that year, I was detailed up in Mosul. I traveled and worked out the issue, and on my way back, I was directed to go through Balad to hitch a ride back to Baghdad. While waiting for the ride in the air terminal, there was a battalion of army support folks who was also traveling. Many of them were sick. They would cough and be hacking up a lung. I tried to stay as far away as I could from them. My travel continued without them, but I was to live to regret it. week later I came down with swine flu thanks to all the coughing and hacking pogs back at the airport terminal. I went to the doctor on post, and because I was retired military, I was seen. He said that I was to immediately go into quarantine. My barracks did not have individual bathrooms, so I was led to the truck by my buddy and driven the 5 miles to the other side of the base complex to Camp Liberty. I was sent down the road past the PX, on down to the right-hand side past the Y. If you've been there, you'll understand. And almost to the end of the road, 2 large campsites short. It was down by the rec yard where they all brought all the destroyed vehicles. Then way back to almost the eastern sidewall of the camp. I was 1 camp short of the wall. The camps were about 20 trailers long, all surrounded by concrete T-walls. You could drive between the rows. Then 10 of those rows wide make up a camp, with a large space to drive semi-trucks between the camps. My hut was on one end of the road. It connected to another living space through a shared bathroom. My buddy kicked me out of the truck. I walked between the T-walls up to the door and opened it. The dust on the floor didn't bother me at first. Everything is dusty in Iraq. My buddy followed me in and we looked at the dusty accommodations. I walked over and flipped the mattress over to the clean side and sat down. The room had a desk, a walk-in closet, and a shared bathroom. It also had an air conditioner, and when it was turned on, it pumped out very cool, sweet-smelling air. It was then that I noticed the calendar hanging on the wall. July 2007, 2 years before. My buddy told me he would go and pick up my poncho liner and laptop that was in my day pack. That way I could watch movies while I waited out my 7 days of quarantine. He also told me that he would bring me meals during the days I was staying. I thanked him, and he left. It was mid-afternoon. I was tired, so I laid down and tried to take a breath while resting. I was feeling sick as a dog. It was then in the quiet that I thought I heard someone talking outside. I couldn't catch the conversation, which bothered me some. And as I could not hear if they were speaking English or Farsi. The hut door was locked. I went down through the bathroom to see if the other hut door was locked, which it also was. I kept the lights off so nobody would know that I was there and come looking. When my buddy came back, I told him what happened. It was getting dark by then. He had brought my laptop, a poncho liner, and in an afterthought he included a nice Tonto knife I traveled with as I was not supposed to have a firearm for some reason. He left. I curled up in my poncho liner and was soon fast asleep. I woke later that night sleeping on my side facing the wall. It had grown quite dark in the room. Still facing the wall, I could hear voices speaking quite softly, but distinctly. You ask him. No, you ask him. At this point, I was wide awake and staring at the wall. Did I forget to lock the door? Who is in here with me? Something kicked the bed frame, and I thought somebody was trying to figure out why I was sleeping in their room. So I rolled over and I looked around. No one was in the room. I got up and checked the doors and under the bed, and you could say that I was somewhat shaken by the encounter so far. After everything was checked, including the closet, yeah, I'm a big scaredy cat, retired Green Beret. I turned on the closet light but closed the door almost. I was in the shadows in the room, and the room was just light so I could see. If someone was messing with me, I was not gonna take it. I was sick and feeling pretty crappy. This time I wrapped up the poncho liner facing the room. Things got quiet after a while, so I drifted off to sleep. I was again awoken about an hour later by those same voices asking the same thing. Only this time a voice stated clearly, I'll ask him. It was at this time that I was laying on my back and something climbed up on the bed and sat on my feet like you would during a sit-up event. Needless to say, I was wide awake, and they had my full attention. With a sharp intake of breath, what or whomever was sitting on my feet jumped off. I sat up, and there was no one in the room that I could see. The smell in the room, which was cool, dusty, turned into a sharp, burned smell. Thought it was coming from the air conditioner. Got up to check. While my back was turned, I heard the voice say, distinctly again, "Ask him." I told them in my best SGM voice, "Stand easy, and I'd be with them in a minute." I walked to the door, went outside, leaving the door open. It was early morning, about 0400 hours. The sun was just starting to light up the sky. Sat down on the steps and waited for my buddy. At 0600 he showed up and looked at me strangely, asking why I was out on the steps as he handed me my breakfast. I told him we were leaving. He laughed and said, "No, you have 6 more days of quarantine. Go back inside and relax." I told him, "No, I'm good." He found me sitting in the shade of the T-wall for lunch, same for dinner. He was starting to wonder what was going on. I told him, "I'll tell you if you take me away from here." He just laughed as he drove away. That night the same things happened again, and more. The next day I was sitting on the steps. That's when 4 of the soldiers carried a private by the legs and arms into the room next to mine. They flung him onto the bed. They dropped a box of MREs and a 12-pack of water, and they were laughing, and they said, "Later, loser." I stayed outside till around 2300 hours, then went in and prepped for the nightly activities. The following morning around 0500, I was out sitting on the steps. That's when the door to the other hut burst open and a very scared private ran out. He looked left and then right, breathing pretty hard like he had just run a marathon. I smiled at him and said, "How's it going?" He sat down and tried to light a cigarette. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't light the match, gave up after a few seconds. I could tell he was pretty shook by something. He looked right at me and said, "Did you?" I said, "You met them too, I see." Calmed down a little. I said, "I don't think they're going to do you any harm, but it is a little unsettling." He said, "Yeah, I'm leaving. They can't make me stay here." I laughed and said I have 4 more days, could use the company. His mind was made up, and when it got light, he went in and packed up all of his stuff and left. My buddy was true to his word, and each day he brought breakfast, lunch, and dinner like clockwork, each time finding me sitting on the steps or in the shade with the door open waiting. Finally, on the last day, he came by for lunch and said, "Time to leave. We can go get pizza." I had all my stuff packed, shut the door, then jumped in the truck. He then asked, "Now you going to tell me what's going on?" I told him, "Not till we're away from this place." We drove over to the billeting office to give the key back. We went inside, had to wait as a tall, muscular Black Army CW4 was chewing out one of his soldiers. He was not in a good mood. When he was done, I walked up and introduced myself as the guy staying in the quarantine hut. He asked if there were any problems as he reached for the key. I looked him in the eye, and as he grabbed the key I hung on, I basically just said, "Chief, you need to cut that key and the key to the other side of that hut in half and never issue to anyone ever again." He wasn't amused, asking if anything was wrong with the hut. I told him, "Chief, you go and spend 1 night in there and you'll understand why I'm telling you to cut those keys up." He got pissed. He took the keys. I left with my buddy looking at me like I'd lost my mind. At pizza an hour later, I told my buddy what had happened the whole week, leaving nothing out. He thought I was full of crap. A week later, I was walking through the PX at Camp Liberty, looking at all the pawed-over items. I was thinking if I could use another t-shirt with a slogan on it or a new 501 shirt with my buddy in tow. Down the aisle, I see this chief, and he's running at me. He grabs my arm and says he cut the key in half, and no one under any circumstance, anybody will ever stay in those huts ever again. This shocked and surprised my buddy especially. The chief said he was pissed at me when I turned in the key thinking I'd trashed the place and went over to check it out. It was getting dusk when he went, found the rooms neat and tidy, but also found them, and they wanted to talk with him. I later learned that the camp was handed over to the Iraqi army. I always wondered who got those rooms and just how that went for them. House on Cassia Street. When I was a young boy, it was a treat to go to Grandpa's house. It was a nice 2-story house, around 1,600 square feet all told. It was surrounded by large willow trees. Upstairs, Grandpa had an office with a locked solid core hardwood door. You were not allowed into it, unless by personal invitation, which was rare, if ever. He liked to go to the desert and poke around. He'd usually do this in caves. That's where he acquired a lot of interesting items. Arrowheads, beads, pottery shards, along with a bobcat named Tuffy, which you could pet it. If it was his idea anyway. As he got older, he came to live with my folks in another town. My cousin and her 17-year-old son went to live in the house. There were many break-ins happening at that time. Things went fine until some months later my grandfather died. 2 weeks after the funeral at about 0200 a.m., my cousin's son was sleeping upstairs in the bedroom outside the office. That's when someone walked up the stairs, waking him up. Grabbed a baseball bat, was about to start after them when he saw that it was my grandfather in a large pool of light. Grandpa looked at him and went through the door and into the office. The boy jumped up and ran down the stairs to his mom's room, waking her up and telling her what had happened. They just both went up and peeked under the door. They could see Grandpa walking around inside the office, could hear the desk chair being pulled out from the desk, doors inside the office opening up and closing. As it got light outside, things began to slow down, and then all movement stopped as it got lighter. The door was locked, so they couldn't go in. Called my mom to tell her what had happened. My cousin and her son were pretty rattled by this event. Mom, Dad, and Grandma went over to check it out, see if anything was amiss. When they got there, the door was still locked on the office. Grandma used her key and went in to look around. Nothing was missing, but the chair and all the doors had been moved. Things on the desk were shuffled around. Grandma closed and locked the door, saying it was all okay. That would have been the end of it. But Grandpa came back several times to his office. The family grew accustomed to his visits. Then one night the boy was woken up by an Indian girl in a fully beaded buckskin dress staring down at him at the side of his bed. He turned his head and looked back, and she was gone. From time to time, other people visited him in the night. A woman in a long coat holding a small dog. This went on for some months. Then one night something else came to visit and the boy packed his things and left, saying he was never setting foot in that house ever again. When questioned, no one could get him to comment on what it was. The house was emptied of all of its possessions, sold several months later when Grandma died. I often wonder if things settled down after it was sold. Coal mine ghost story. I just remembered this incident. When I was just starting at the Emery in the Consol coal mine, I was a red hat. Being one of those could not be left alone or put in the mine by himself. To get the coal out of the seam, they dug 5 tunnels into the coal seam and labeled them 1 through 5. Tunnels 1 and 2 brought in clean air from outside, and across the quote-unquote face where they were using the continuous miner to cut the coal seam into little chunks. Picture a crab with a horizontal cylinder on the front with spikes that tore up the coal when it spun and rolled around. Tunnels 4 and 5 took the bad air from the face to back outside the mine. The middle tunnel, number 3, that was neutral air. It held the belt line that dumped the coal from the shuttle car onto the belt till, at least till it hit a corner where the coal was dumped onto another belt till. It was eventually dumped outside in a large pile. Between the tunnels, they cut cross-cut tunnels into each of the tunnels, then closed off the cross-cut surrounding Tunnel 3. That way the air would move down and around. Every 4th cross-cut had a small door in the stoppage wall so you could move laterally from the tunnel to tunnel as needed. One day I was told that one of the belt lines had shut down, and the other belt had filled the junction with coal that needed to be shoveled back onto the belt. I was told it was okay, as I was just down the entryway tunnel from a working section. If anything happened, I was to walk up to the section or call on the mine phone located at the belt junctions. They had just spray-powdered limestone on the surface of the coal, roof, floor, and walls. Down in that section of the belt, especially. This was just to keep explosions down due to the coal dust. I rode into the mine with the section personnel and got off when they showed me. They showed me to dig the belt out. The coal was almost up to the roof when I got there. The belt line went uphill into the darkness. After several hours of shoveling, I noticed that someone was coming down that hill toward me. Looked like they were trying to be sneaky by holding their hand over the light on their hard hat. It was flickering while they walked. The other miners liked to play jokes on each other, especially the new guys. I thought it was one of those times. So I walked up the hill. I was across from a crosscut, and jumping the belt, walked into the crosscut, turned off my light, and stood next to the corner using my shovel as a bat, waiting for the guy to come get me. The person walked up to just short of the corner and looked around. It was then that I noticed that you could see my footsteps in the powdered limestone showing up as black steps where I walked. The person stepped back, walked back up the hill. I waited for a second and then jumped out, turning on my light to try to catch him. The footsteps coming down the hill could clearly be seen coming down the hill, stop, turn around, and go back up the hill in the next crosscut. The 2 sets of footprints were separated by several feet. I jumped across the belt and ran up the hill to catch the guy, as the next crosscut was a blind stoppage wall, which meant there was no door. When I got to where I could see into the crosscut, the footprints went into it and up the wall with a heel print at the bottom of the wall. I stood there, was trying to figure out for some time what happened, then decided I should not be there myself. I walked down to the mine phone and called the section, saying that there was no water down there. Asked if I could come up and get some. They said, sure, come up and get some. I walked rather fast to the section break area and sat down. They had built a small kitchen break area to eat lunch in. One of the guys handed me a case of water bags and said to go back to work. I said no. The section boss was sitting there and was pretty insistent that I go back to the belt area and go back to work. I told him no. He called the shift boss. They said that I was to be fired and to keep me there. The guys from the section tried to persuade me to go back to work. I said no. The shift super was on his way. The section boss asked why I would not go back. I told him to go down and look at the situation over, and then decide if I needed to be down there by myself. He left, came back directly sitting next to me, drinking several bags of water before he could speak. About that time, the shift super came to the section and told me to get on the tractor. He was taking me out of the mine. The section boss told him to wait up, asked him to follow him down the belt line as I sat on the tractor. The guys in the section were again trying to get me to just go back down and go to work so I wouldn't have to be fired. But after about 15 minutes, both came back and asked me if I saw him. I said no, but he was just around the corner from me. I thought it was one of the guys from the section trying to play a joke on me. I told him what happened, and just as it happened, leaving nothing out, the whole section was there to hear it in silence. The super said the belt junction was shoveled out good enough and that I was to stay with the section and help out as needed. I wasn't in trouble, nor going to be fired. I reluctantly got off the tractor. The super turned to the rest of the section and said, "Be careful, Reese, he's out and about." This shocked the crew. I, being new, didn't know what they meant. After the super left the section, boss said to help tend cables of continuous miners so the miner wouldn't run over them for the rest of the shift. Pretty easy work. Once back outside after the shift, I had several visitors. The foreman of the whole mine came by to ask questions and to show him on the map where the incident occurred. Several old hands that walked the mine sampling the air at different locations, called the fire bosses. They also came by to chat. I still couldn't figure out what was going on. Finally, one of the fire bosses came up after everybody had left and pulled me aside, told me what was happening. I thought I was still in trouble. In the mid-40s, the mine was being operated by a small crew mining, mostly by hand. They had imported one of the first continuous miners in the state. For lunch, they would go out of the entrance portal and sit down and make a fire and eat. One windy day, the fire got out of hand, started the mine on fire. It took 2 weeks along with a company of National Guard soldiers helping to get the fire under control. The continuous miner was still in the mine. They were going to blow up the entry portal to seal the air from getting into the mine and extinguish the fire. Al Reese and another guy volunteered to go into the mine and hook chains to the equipment so they could pull it out of the mine and not lose thousands of dollars when they collapsed the tunnel. The two went into the mine, hooked up the chains. The folks at the portal pulled out the equipment to find other volunteers sitting on the miner dead. Oxygen that had burned off down in the mine, black damp gas. Al's body was never recovered. From time to time, he shows up mostly down by the old works. He wears leather logging boots instead of the steel-toe rubber boots issued at the miners at the time. He uses a carbide light on his hard hat that flickers instead of the battery-equipped one miners use nowadays. Train ride. There are several other incidents that happened in that coal mine while I was there. I helped spray powdered limestone. It's dust. And I would do this several times working with a guy from West Virginia who's very experienced in dusting. One day after the Reese incident, he confided in me his own experience. The coal seams back in West Virginia are only about 60 inches tall. The mine had a rail system to take the miners in and out, and a separate train to take the coal out. He was scheduled to dust a particular section just off the main line. So, the train stopped. He got off. Everybody waved to him as the train left. He went through the man door to start working in the section. He worked all day in the closed, loud section. When it was time to go home at the end of the shift, he went out the man door to find the train waiting for him, which was unusual. Most times he had to wait for the train to show up. When he got onto the train car, everybody in there moved out of the way and no one would sit by him or even talk to him. They would just smile at him. Miners usually played jokes on each other, so this was pretty normal to him. He got off the train just shy of the main entry portal and went into the mine office to report what he had done for the day. Everyone stared at him and wanted to know how he was there. He explained that he rode the train out just like every other day. They called him a liar, was going to fire him. He told them to ask the guys he rode on the train with. They asked if he was being funny. Finally, he took them back into the mine and showed them what he had done. It was there that they told him that the train had lost its brakes, had plummeted to the bottom of the mine. In that process, it killed everyone just after he had gotten off. He couldn't have ridden the train, but did. Ask Reddit. Have seen many unexplained things over the years, and especially felt them. But this one has never left my brain. When I was around 6 years old, I had my first paranormal experience. I have 4 siblings, but at this moment it was just me and my brother, who we'll call Aaron. Aaron had a girlfriend at the time who he'd been with for around 3 or 4 years. She was a major part of my childhood up until I was like 10 years old. We'll call her Star. So Aaron and Star were going to hang out and stayed over at her house. My mom was busy with other things involving my other 2 brothers, so she asked if they would take care of me for the night. I was a very quiet and well-behaved kid, so this wasn't a tough question. Plus, I adored Star, and spending time with her and my brother was one of my favorite things to do. So this way, Aaron and Star wind up agreeing. They're both around 18 or 19 at this point. We all set off to her house. Her house, found out later, was built on Native American ground, but we're talking like battleground. Her house was rather spacious with a biggish backyard too. I hated her backyard. Even when I was younger, like 3 to 4, I didn't like going back there. Felt very wrong. I wouldn't go any further than the garden lining the side of the house. She always would like, "Oh, it's okay. There's nothing back here." But I'd always refuse, and quite aggressively too. But her backyard was the least of my problems. When we got to her house, everything was great. We'd been sleeping in her living room, which has 3 separate couches in the shape of a box without a top. I was super stoked to have a cool sleepover with Star and Aaron, so it was super fun throughout the day. I played with her hamster, her keyboard, and her piano thing. I'd mess around with her old Barbies. So when night came, it was no problem to me, as I was pretty tuckered out. But we all crawled on our couches and just passed out. That's when the fun really started. I didn't normally have nightmares. As far as I can remember, I only remember one before this period of time. But this one shook me then, gives me the chills now. It was one of those dreams where you kind of pop up in the middle of nothingness. Like the everywhere is white and there's no sense of direction. But directly in front of me was a woman, standing what seemed like 300 feet tall. She was wearing blue shorts, like the kind that elderly women wear. She had a white top, no shoes, and her face screamed hatred. She was much taller and bigger than me, let alone scared me. It got much worse, though, when she started screaming at me. It was incoherent words, but it was so loud it felt like it shook all of my insides. I remember curling into a ball, covering my ears with all my might, before feeling something warm trickling out of them. She made my ears bleed. I woke up after that. I was mortified. I was feeling every type of fear. But it intensified when I felt my ears because I could still hear them ringing. I felt a bit of blood. Not as much as in the dream, but enough to be noticeable. I was sobbing and crawled my way over to my brother, who gladly took me into his arms even whilst half asleep. He talked softly and rubbed my back until I fell asleep again. When I woke up the next morning, everybody was getting ready to have breakfast. All was normal. Aaron mentioned that he was worried about me. It was because of how he was, or rather how I was sobbing. I was begging to sleep next to him. So he hugged me and told me it was okay. Let me climb into a chair. I was all settled in my chair and I hear a eeeeee coming from right next to me. The chair had moved, and there was this woman. She was standing there next to me, staring at me. She wasn't tall this time, but she was tall enough. I was petrified. I went instantly pale and felt sick. Star even asked me if I was all right. Nobody else noticed the chair, or even could see this person I was looking at. Star looked pretty concerned for me, so I remember being like, I need to pee, to get away from this lady. This is the part that continues to rot my brain. I remember walking to the bathroom extremely nauseous. I was so terrified, I was worried I was going to piss myself. I walk into the bathroom, which is a straight shot to the wall. The shower was a stand-up in the corner, and the toilet in the other. And there she was, contorted unnaturally against the wall. It was some fucking crooked shit, man. She was the length of the wall and more. The thing where you see it in horror movies, it's like where the entire wall upwards and even the ceiling just bent. She had these long-ass arms that touched the ground, and she just smiled at me. It was this wicked, horrific smile. To this day, Erin, Star, and her parents had never seen me act so hysterically. I burst into tears. I was screaming. I was crying. I even threw a few times just to sobs and just unrelenting fear. They had to call my mom to come get me. This is where my memory's fuzzy, which is odd. I remember my brother calling my mom and being like, Mom, you need to come get her. She won't stop crying. She's sick. She's hysterical. Something's wrong. And then everything is very fuzzy. I remember getting into my mother's car and her consoling me and helping me to stop cry. But that's it. Nothing between the time of the call until I got home. It was like everything stopped. Ask Reddit. I dreamed about a girl from Poland my whole life. Not the whole time, but every now and then. And this was ever since I was a kid. She would tell me that we were engaged to be married one day, and that she passed away, and we never did. Apparently, I married somebody else in that last time. Last time? What the fuck? At first, when I was younger, we were playing, and she was happy because she missed me. Once again, what the fuck? When I started to grow up, she got more and more erratic in the way that she behaved. When my real-life girlfriend passed away at 17, I dreamed of her instead of the Polish girl. And this might have given her the final straw. Because one night she was in my dream again, and she was very upset. She told me that I replaced her again, and this had hurt her. She also said that it wasn't her fault that she passed away when she did, and that I shouldn't blame her or be angry with her after all this time. Then she stopped appearing for some years. Then she apparently forgave me. Last time she returned was after my wife and I became parents, asked me why I was still mad at her. I told her I wasn't ever mad at her, and if I was the last time, I apologize. But I was alive and she wasn't, so there's no way for us to be together at the moment. She said that she understood and that, well, they would wait. She also told me that this wasn't the first time that we got together. And before that we were married, but I was the wife then, which was terrifying to hear. She stopped coming to my dreams after that. But she appeared in my wife's dreams, wished her good luck. My wife, who knows everything, thanked her and asked her to watch over us and keep us safe. She promised that she'll do that. Still cannot explain this, but I believe that either our karmic connection was too strong to be broken by death, or she was my spirit wife. Question remains, why wasn't she back with me? She refused to answer when I asked. Either way, she never tried to hurt me or anybody I know or love. She even warned me about things and people a few times. Ask Reddit. I was spending the night at my dad's when I was like 21. I shut the bedroom door, which meant lifting it a little bit and pushing it to close it tight. Then I lay down. Immediately, I couldn't move. I started hearing this noise that made me think of a chopper. I could also hear talking, but not words. Just the sound of people talking. It got louder and louder, and I was so scared, but I couldn't move. Then it stopped, and I heard the front door open. I heard footsteps and the sound of something being dragged down the hall. Made me think of a garbage bag. Then I heard my room door open. I was so goddamn terrified. I was finally able to force my eyes open. The door was wide open, but no one was there. My body could move again. I got up and crept into the hall. My dad lived up north and away from the city, so it's a very dark place. Couldn't see anyone and I didn't hear anything. I walked to the living room and went to a lamp. This lamp was the kind that turned on by turning a knob and slowly came up to full brightness. But when I turned it on, it kept getting brighter and brighter and brighter. It got so bright it covered my eyes and turned my head. When I opened my eyes again, I was back in bed and my bedroom door was wide open. I know people will say sleep paralysis a nightmare, and I can't argue with that. But in 40 years, I've never ever had another experience like it. I have insomnia, always have, and this started as soon as I laid down. But I don't know, I don't really believe aliens come here either, but I'll tell you this. My dad still lives there 20 years later, and I've stayed in a hotel every time I've visited ever since. That's how frightening it was, whatever it was. Ask Reddit. My grandma's house was creepy. You would hear footsteps downstairs while no one was down there. You would see black shadow figures out of the corner of your eye, but when you would look, you would see nothing. She had this curtain hanging up to separate the two rooms. I saw a shadow walk across that curtain. When I was 16 or 17, this was 8 or 9 years ago, I was playing hide and seek with my little brother who was 4. He told me to close my eyes and count, so I did. I heard him run upstairs, so being the good big sister I was, I began to act like I didn't know where he was. I started just kind of walking up the stairs to the door at the top. There was a door at the top of the stairs. I could see a dark figure standing behind the door. Knew it was my brother. I started pushing the door into him and felt the door hit him. I wasn't pushing it hard enough for it to really touch him and bounce back at me, if that makes sense. But again, I kept searching, even though I saw him behind the door through the crack where the hinges are. Anywho, when I was done pretending to not have found him, I went downstairs and went to the dining room table where I felt something grab my leg. When I looked down, it was my brother. I asked my mom if he had been down here the entire time. She said he hadn't moved from his spot beneath the table. I know I saw someone behind the door upstairs, and I could feel the door hitting something every time I tried to open it all the way. I don't know if this story makes sense, but it still scares me to this day. Ask Reddit. I was at my daughter's house. She and her husband were given his deceased uncle's house. 1 year and she and my granddaughters and I had gone to the store. My son-in-law, James, who's 5'9" and stocky, and a friend of theirs who lives with them. Gary, 6 foot thin build. They both worked at the same shop delivering packages, but sometimes one would get off before the other. To set this up, the house is older. When you walk into the foyer, her room is off to the right. Straight ahead, you walk into the kitchen, and off to the right further is the living room with the bathroom off of that. She kept blackout drapes in the living room, so it was usually dark. So we get back from the store. Daughter goes out back, kids run upstairs. I'm in the kitchen by the counter unloading bags. I'm facing the back door. I see a tall shadow move from the bathroom and it goes straight into the TV/entertainment system. I think to myself that Gary's home because Gary would always come home and then go straight to the TV entertainment. That's where he had a little bowl that he would put his keys and change in. I didn't even think twice about it. I get done and I go use the bathroom. As I finish and leave, it crosses my mind that I didn't see Gary in the living room. My daughter had come in from the back and I asked her where Gary was. She said he's still at work. I told her, no, I just saw him in the living room. She and I just maybe passed it off. But I did get to mulling it over. When James came home first, I asked James if his uncle was more like his build or taller and thinner. James tells me his uncle was tall and thin. We got to talking. James told me that his uncle made his bedroom where theirs was now, instead of an upstairs bedroom. As he got sicker, couldn't use the stairs. So if he went to the bathroom, he would just walk right through the doorway where my daughter and James had their TV and entertainment system. Gary got home a few hours later. I didn't get the heebie-jeebies. At no time I was really thinking I was seeing anything other than a flesh and blood person. We experienced something evil. On my mom's side of the family, most of the time we see them, we're alone. But sometimes we all see them when we're together. Family members that died many years ago come to visit on important family events. These apparitions are short, like a minute and a half. Most of the time, just a few seconds, but enough for us to be in silence and for all of us to be looking in the same direction. One of my uncles died, so he's the one who appears often at home. He's the only one who said something to me. Just once, but again, that's it, I'd just see them. Also, I didn't understand what he said. The brother of my grandfather was murdered. My great-grandfather was visited by him. Told him who killed him and who witnessed his death. That's how they resolved the case. That's the oldest encounter that I know. No idea if this thing is running on that side of my family for a longer time, though. All of these encounters are good in the sense that it makes us happy. It's like a continuous sense of protection. The only thing that used to make me afraid was sleep paralysis. But I believe that my eyes are open but my brain is still sleeping. Sleep paralysis is terrifying. And sometimes, just sometimes, that makes me wonder if there is something else. But I prefer not to think about that. Because it's dark. I don't know. I just don't want to know anything else. Mostly because a couple friends told about this. They started having them too. And I know that this is a coincidence, but I feel guilty anyways. The only person who said something to me once was my grandmother. I had an awful sleep paralysis during the afternoon. My door was open, I woke up to eat, and my grandmother told me that she walked near my room and saw a big black mass on top of me. She didn't ask if I was okay or anything. I didn't say anything either. We didn't talk about these things. There's so many stories I can tell about this. But anyways, I don't want darkness in my life. On my dad's side, the story is the complete opposite. My grandmother was something else. She had a dark, dark energy. I don't know how to describe it, but being with her was like running out of air. I just couldn't. I stopped talking to her, getting close to her, even when we were living in the same house. She belonged to many cults, and we never asked anything. She only talked about this with me once, but it was one of those things that don't exist if you don't talk about it. Nobody messed with her. Nobody even asked. It wasn't a secret at all either. My dad told me things that he saw when he was younger. And for what I know, his uncle was involved. People would come to her house because she helped them with magic, like love unions and stuff like that. No idea. He saw weird things. But he also had my great-grandfather that was a good person, and he has some paranormal stories with him, good ones. My father is like the typical businessman, so he looks all serious, and it's weird to listen to him a few times that he tells these stories. When I was younger, I felt that my grandmother didn't like me. My father always tried to make a bond within us, but with the years, it wasn't a secret that I guess you could just politely say she hated me. So my dad never really tried again. We all thought this happened because she wanted her first grandchild to be a boy. My dad and my stepmom then had my sister, and she ignored her completely. She didn't hate her, but when we used to eat together, she would serve her food and she would skip me. Actually, it was kind of ridiculous. She also hated my stepmother, but things got a little better when my brother was born. My grandmother would kill and have died for him. I think that my grandmother and I only fought once, so it wasn't like something building up on actual facts or events. Just life. That time she got furious. She started screaming at me because I hurried my brother to eat. His dish was getting cold. I just freezed in shock. That's while she screamed that I tried to stab her with the fork. Didn't even move. My stepmother was at the door and she saw the entire thing. So they knew that it was a lie, and I never forgave her. From then on, we ignored each other. I left the country. She died. I wasn't there. My dad called me to ask what we should write on her grave because nobody knew what to say. I sent him the most typical text that you write on somebody's gravestone when somebody dies. I have so many stories to tell, but when I watched Hereditary, I was in complete shock. It was exactly that. I made my family see the movie and nobody said a word. We all knew what the other one was thinking. Okay, the summary of a summary. Recently, we all got together for my bachelor party. My family, stepmother and sister, and my friends. My friends knew all the stories about my grandmother because I had my awareness of my family is not normal thing. That's when I met them and I started talking about all this. My family traveled to my wedding. We were all together for the first time in years. They stayed at my place. I don't remember why we talked about my grandmother during the bachelor party, but my sister started telling stories about her funeral that were so funny. I was crying, laughing. We all have a dark sense of humor, but we spent at least an hour laughing hard. They told things that I didn't know. I came back home still laughing. Couldn't finish my phrases when I tried to tell my husband about what happened. That night I went to bed and everything changed. I started feeling the most horrible sense of fear. I have never been completely terrified. I had to turn the light on and I started to hear voices in the room. I saw a light on the wall and I woke up to my husband because I was panicking. In that moment, 4 a.m, my dad knocked on the door. I went outside. He asked me very angrily, "What the fuck happened?" He took me to see his wife. She was very sick and pale, almost blue. And we almost didn't drink. She was having all the signs of a heart attack. She's a nurse, so she was able to verbalize all of her symptoms. She said that this should stop soon, so we trust her. But I made calls to check the hospital and check her without insurance. She was fully awake, but her blood pressure was getting worse. My dad has one of those machines that you put on your arm, and in that moment I knew that waiting was going to be neglectful, so we decided to go to the hospital. My dad went to the bathroom and I went alone, and my stepmother looked at me and said, "What door did we open?" I just stared at her. We didn't say anything else. My dad came back angry at me, asking why I followed him to the bathroom and why I was talking to him through the door. He screamed, "What?" And my stepmother and I told him that I didn't follow him. My father said that he heard my voice saying his name over and over through the wall. All happened in less than 5 minutes. I just told him that it was my grandmother. He looked at me in silence. He didn't say anything. We didn't tell him anything else. We just left the house. My brother didn't know anything, but he was fully awake because for some reason he couldn't sleep that night. We went to the hospital and we waited until 2 or 3 p.m. This way only my sister had some sleep. When we came back, my stepmother said that at least my sister had a normal night. And in that moment, my dog, the nicest dog, jumped and bit my sister's face. From that night, my dog never stopped biting, and he constantly cries. No idea what to do with that. But me and my husband are constantly trying to make him safe. We pay attention to him all day. So we all went to sleep. I was going to get married the next day. When I woke up, my cousin on the mom's side called to tell me that she had a weird dream about my grandmother. She didn't know what happened after the bachelor party, by the way. She told me that she saw her all dressed in black. She was uncomfortable but not afraid because she saw her back. She was leaving. Then I told her what happened. She said that we should never talk about this ever again. Even now that I'm writing, I feel that I'm doing something wrong. When I think about this in my mind, I ask my grandmother for forgiveness because I wasn't good to her, because I wrote about her, because we laughed. I truly learned my lesson. My stepmother's doing better now. And now I can finish this whole thing just saying that my entire life I felt only love and care for those who died. And now I'm 35 years old and this happened. I don't want to believe that this is real. In the back of my mind, I feel that I knew the light, the love, and now I had a glimpse of something deeply, deeply wrong and terrifying. I've never experienced this level of fear, and it happens every time I think about this. Nobody in my mom's side is like religious, and nobody practices witchcraft or anything like that, or even rituals or anything. I did an altar with candles for my father-in-law, and something did happen, but it was nice. My husband just came and asked me why I'm acting so weird while writing. I told him. He said that I shouldn't post it, that I should talk about this with my psychologist because it gives me anxiety. I'm a PhD student, so my fuel is anxiety. Also, I made this account because I used the other one to write about work. I already talked to my psychologist. She understood it because she's also from Latin America. She said that her dad visited her when he died. I should accept this because it's our culture, our traditions, part of who we are. I agree, of course. Ask Reddit. This happened at 5:15 a.m. Sunday, July 16th of 2019 with my wife and me. We believe it's a woman's spirit we came into contact with. Whenever I say see, it's non-physically. I look over at my wife and she's crying. I offer her a hug and she accepts, but she says she isn't sad. After the hug, we both felt the room drop about 15 degrees over 5 seconds, originating from the doorway and sweeping across us. At this point, we realize it's a spirit. We plead for the spirit to come back another time, light incense and a white candle of protection, have it near the doorway. We then proceed to sage just the bedroom and say that we're not saging the rest of the house to prove that we want help. Just not right now. Had some drinks, but not anything drunk. My wife and I talk about imaging that we were feeling and receiving. She could feel overwhelming blue, a pressure in her head too, and the word Willamette. My wife doesn't know Portland water features. I see rippling water. My wife can only see a silhouette of a woman. I got the whole picture of her still burned into my head today. We both keep looking at the doorway, and I mention how I can feel her pacing from just outside the doorway all the way to the edge of the bed right next to the candle. Because she could make it past the candle and the sage, we understood she didn't mean us harm. We went into the front room and used the Ouija board. We asked her if she was here. The planchette moved to yes. I have to admit before this I've always been a little skeptical, so I nudged the planchette to see if it was my wife. Just gave my soft push so my wife wasn't moving too. Wife also admits to testing it if it was me after everything. Then we asked her, "What's your name?" The planchette stopped between the G and H center board. Then we asked if she wanted to communicate. She said no. We said goodbye and went to the bedroom. We understood she wasn't there for her. So we were reassessing in the bedroom what we were seeing and feeling. We both could see a middle school boy. At this point, my wife is able to see the woman more than just a silhouette. I think my wife needed the spirit to see that she was safe. This boy put off a social punk exterior but a loving interior. We couldn't see the father in the picture at all, so we understood that she was worried for her son. While my wife and I were talking, I could feel a cold, comforting hand on my back. Since this boy's life was about to be uprooted to nothing he really knows, she didn't want the punk exterior to win over the loving interior. At this point, we have a lull in the conversation and both are processing. I start to blubber-face cry where tears and everything are happening. I hardly ever cry as I'm slightly self-emotionally disconnected. Sadness is the hardest for me to show. Think emotionally strong pillar in the relationship. My wife holds my hand and starts speaking to the spirit, saying how her son will be just fine and how he has way more love in him than punk, and that it will always shine through. While my wife is speaking, I no longer am crying. I say in a fully normal tone of voice, "She's gone." We couldn't feel her energy anymore at all. We believed that she moved on. I looked at the clock and it was rounding 6 a.m. We believed from everything that this spirit attached to me when I crossed the Willamette over the Selwood Bridge. After crossing the bridge, I noticed I was getting testy in response to things, but wasn't necessarily upset by them. I'm an oblivious person, so I think it took my wife, even lived in a haunted house, pointing it out for me to connect to the spirit. Ask Reddit. I've had a few experiences that I cannot explain. In the spirit of Halloween, I'll share the scariest one. I was unemployed for a while 10 years ago. I would regularly take long walks during the day to pass the time. One day I stumbled upon an old graveyard with some interesting-looking headstones. I decided to check it out. Many of the graves were from the late 1600s, early 1800s. It was apparent that this place was barely ever maintained, if at all. I walked around reading the inscriptions on the headstones, started to feel like I was being watched. There was no one else around, but the feeling spooked me. So I left after 10 or 15 minutes. For the duration of my walk home, it felt like I was being followed, but there was nobody behind me. I finally shook the feeling when I got inside and soon forgot about it. At about 4:30 a.m. the next day, there was a loud banging on my front door. It sounded like 5 to 10 very hard knocks and was loud enough to wake me and my roommate. We were both asleep on the second floor. We looked outside, but the motion sensor light hadn't gone on and neither of us saw anyone. We chalked it up to the cat doing crazy cat things, went back to sleep. Not 2 days later, the same thing happened. Very loud banging on the front door just before sunrise. This time, my roommate and I both sprang out of our beds and ran outside to catch whoever was doing this. But there was no one in the yard, no one on the street, no cars driving anywhere nearby, nothing. The cat was spooked and hiding, so I knew it wasn't him this time. We were all frazzled. I couldn't fall back to sleep for hours. It dawned on me that the feeling I had after visiting the graveyard wasn't all in my head. and this possibility really freaked me out. Luckily, the knocker stopped visiting our house after that second time, and I never went to that graveyard again. I'll always wonder what the hell that was all about. Ask Reddit. I used to live right next to a lake in New Zealand, which to us Maori people is very, very sacred. Early on in the morning it was quite foggy and misty out on the lake, but I had noticed a waka, which is a canoe with a bunch of people rowing in it whilst chanting a native Maori tune. Now there's a certain traditional activity called waka ama, which is where a group of people row a canoe whilst performing traditional Maori chants and songs. However, this was no ordinary group of people. They were looking like literal warriors, intimidating and absolutely horrifying. I felt shivers for the good majority of the time I was watching them, which seemed like ages. Could have only been a couple of minutes max. And just like that, with a loud final chant, every single head on the canoe turned and stared directly at me, slowly began to fade away into literally thin air. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just fog and mist and I just lost my line of sight of the canoe. But the thing is, it looked like a hologram slowly fading out of the top of the water. The next day, the Christchurch earthquake took place, which toppled the city. Later, I found out that a similar occurrence had happened right before Mount Tarawera erupted. People had claimed to have seen Maori war beasts with human bodies and canine heads rowing canoes across the lake chanting. The next day, Mount Tarawera erupted, destroying one of the wonders of the world at the time, pink and white terraces, as well as destroying many villages and killing a lot of people. Some say that seeing this occurrence is actually a warning sign for tragedy to follow. Scariest thing I've ever witnessed with my own eyes. What is happening? One night while asleep, I felt my hand get tapped. Thinking my dog wanted out, I opened my eyes and I looked around. No dog. The bedroom door was still swung shut. I should add that I was sleeping on my left side with my left arm hanging out of the bed. The next night I made sure to sleep on my right side with everything tucked in. This time, in the middle of the night, I got tapped firmly on the back of my left shoulder. Wake up, look around. No one there, no dog. I mentioned both instances to my wife, but nothing else happened. About a week later, she told me that she had been touched on her leg. It was out of the covers. Christmas Eve, I'm taking a nap. That's when I got tapped again. This time in daylight. It was enough to startle me awake, and I shot up looking around. Nothing there. This morning I was awake thinking about if I wanted to get up. I was on my right side with my left arm slung behind my back. My left hand was turned facing outward. It was near my butt. This time it was like a soft punch. Hit the palm of my hand. I would have hit my butt except for the way I was laying. This time I was wide awake, so I know it wasn't a dream. I sat up. Nothing there. I said out loud, "What do you want? Stop it, you're not welcome here." The sound of my voice, my dog nosed the door open and came in to see what I was doing. Good boy. Strange targeted attacks. I live in a house that was built over 125 years ago. We've been renovating this slowly, but pretty steadily for several years. Upon moving in, we tore down some walls and took up carpet, etc. And within a month, I was outside in my car calling my husband because I heard somebody walking on our staircase. They were calling my name. I'd grabbed my infant phone, snagged the keys and a knife in the kitchen, and I was out the door. We've heard organ music, which the previous owner used to play in church. We've heard heavy booted footsteps on her attic steps. More walking on the staircase. All of the kids have seen shadows and have heard someone walking at night while everyone is asleep. I get it. Houses have history. The previous family was here for 6 decades. That's fine. As long as it isn't malicious, then it's whatever. Until this week we had -40 temps. Took down plaster, laid to add insulation. While doing so, we took down part of a wall to reinforce her daughter's room. It had extra support beams. Since then, something is pissed. Here's a breakdown of the past 7 days. All 3 kids at different times of the day, different days and entirely independently of one another, have told us that they saw a shadow that they thought was their dad. All 3 saw it in the same general area next to the wall that we took down. Again, not too bad, but kinda However, I'm not having literal spontaneous scratches and bites showing up on my arms. Or I guess I am. I took fleece pajamas upstairs, and on my way down I felt a burning on the inside of my arm. 2 sets of 3 scratches, all roughly 2 to 3 inches long and perfectly symmetrical. They were developing. Today I came back upstairs after just turning on the dryer. I had a sharp stinging on my outer wrist, and what looks like a possible bite is there. Thought it may be, me biting my wrist in my sleep. I had another on my other wrist 3 days ago, and this looks identical. I have eggshells, cinnamon, sage, and salt for my doorways. I have infused sage spray that I've been using liberally. What else can I do? Does it sound like a normal haunting? Like I said, sounds and shadows are fine, but hurting someone is too far. The previous owners were extremely devout Catholics. We are absolutely not religious. My husband's an atheist. I'm more of a spiritual/pagan-oriented person. We both come from very religious families, though. Any thoughts or ideas would be greatly appreciated. And I greatly appreciate all of you listening or sleeping. See ya.